A very good morning to all of you. A warm welcome to The Edge at Federation Square for this final offering of the Archbishop's Conversations in Melbourne. This is the 63rd such event to be held here since the conversations started back in April 2007. The topic of that first conversation was stem cell research, so we've certainly had many and varied topics over those years. We start today by acknowledging that we are on Wurundjeri country. We honour the original custodians of the land, waters and skies of this country, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, as we seek truth, justice and healing together. I'm your MC for this morning. I'm the Reverend Elizabeth Murray. I am Vicar at Holy Trinity Williamstown. I'm a board member of the Melbourne Anglican Foundation, and it is our absolute delight to be sponsoring this event today along with Anglicare Victoria. For this final conversation, Archbishop Phillip Freier is joined today by Michael Leunig. The initial conversation between the Archbishop and Michael will go for about 50 minutes or so, and we'll then take questions from the audience, hoping to conclude our event today at 10 a.m. Michael was in fact a guest of the Archbishop's conversation back in that first year. The topic then was Poet, Priest, Prophet. What is the role of a prophetic voice in the 21st century? Our topic for discussion today is our society allergic to God? Why are we reluctant to discuss spiritual matters? Michael is a beloved cartoonist, writer, painter, philosopher and poet. His commentary on political, cultural and emotional life spans more than 50 years and has often explored the idea of an innocent and sacred personal world. Please make both Archbishop Phillip and Michael welcome.
Well, thank you. It's good to see everyone here, and good to welcome Michael Leunig back to this stage where, Michael, back in 2007 we were talking about the likelihood of Australia's military involvement in Iraq and other things that were quite disturbing. The world seems entirely consistent in an unhappy way, doesn't it?
Indeed, nothing has changed really, in some ways.
Well, tragically, it seems that all of the age-old things of human failing, the demons of human society, just keep reaching their hands up into the modern world. Yes.
Forgive me. I'm just adjusting to the sort of bewildering experience of coming from far north Victoria late last night, and then coming here. It's a staggering thing. And let me just thank you all for being here. It's my biggest social experience for about a year, I think. No, truly. Sorry to be distract from what you're saying.
Not far from it, no. I think we should value the social experience this offers for us all. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, well, it's a unique day. I've been looking forward to this simply because I've been, as I say, I live fairly remotely. A week goes by, I see nobody, and except Nicola, who's with me always, and it's quite a delight. It's to see these faces here and to talk of this subject. I'll probably flounder to get my footing in these ideas I had, because we initially, did we not? We had a little chat, or you asked me what would you like to talk about, etc. And I have been struck by in recent years by my own generation who seem to feel the need to make it quite clear to you very quickly that they are an atheist. They don't have any time for this nonsense about God. And I became fascinated by that. It was like declaring their credentials. And I think, what is this about? I thought you were an intelligent, inquiring generation who would be interested in the word and what is this word that we've inherited? Let's look at just the word, and for a start. And why so squeamish about talking about it and like washing your hands of it very quickly? And I think there's something missing here. What did Johann Sebastian Bach refer to when he spoke of God, or Mozart, or etc.? Right through history, what were people talking about? And indeed, what are we all talking about if we're talking about that? And is it necessary to absolutely pin it down? I don't think so myself. But I'm curious, as I say, about this. It's as if there's an allergy. I don't talk about that sort of thing. And I just fail to understand. Well, where's your curiosity? Where's your inquiry? And where's your depth of philosophy or whatever, or spiritual life? It's a sort of disappointment that I come across.
Well, Michael, maybe take us back to the thinking, which is a bit of a while back, because I saw you earlier signing, I think for this lady in the front row, one of your little books on prayers.
Yes.
Take us back to where your work developed and how it went into that space, in the public space, in your published work about prayer. Just what was the thinking there? And I suppose after you've thought about that, just are we in a environment today in the society where a public figure like you were at that time with your work could actually move a narrative in that space now?
Whether I could do it now. Look, maybe I should say how those prayers came to be.
Yeah, I think that'd be helpful just to give us a bit of a picture. Yep.
The age who I used to work for.
Yes. We'll come on to that.
They decided to have a Sunday paper, a Sunday version of the Age. And they said, "Oh, we want you to do a cartoon." And I said, "No, the world's got too many jokes and cartoons. I want to do, it's Sunday, it's a sort of special day." And I was fascinated about the idea of making a short little, just a piece of writing which, for want of a better term, I called prayer, because it seemed to often be about what was within us or lay beneath the surface in culture and society, between people, what was underlying it. So in a way it was psychoanalytic, I guess, thinking what's going on here, and what is this word God, which people are so frightened about? Well, not everybody, of course, but there was this kind of, don't go near that. And so I started to write these little so-called prayers, which often began, "Dear God," in the way you begin a letter, the old convention. Dear God, it's a lovely word, dear friend, dear this, for dear life, etc. Near and dear. So these words mean a lot. So I started doing that. Well, of course, my friends were a bit perplexed and some horrified, and "Oh, he's found God," which is a derogatory term, saying he's off with the pixies. And I know I'm off with the pixies. I enjoy being off with the pixies. Great company. But yes, and so the reaction to this was quite strange, and yet it sort of seemed to touch a tender spot in culture that wasn't being addressed in the newspapers generally. I think the Age used to have a a little sort of like a sermon thing on a
Yeah,
Saturday.
I think they still do. There's a faith column that sits alongside of the letters to the editors. I think that I think occasionally I've been involved. Barney Zwartz, who you would have known from the
Barney,
age,
yeah.
he often gets a run. But yeah, but I think it reflects the kind of the privatised directions that I think that our current secular society has. This is a unique and perhaps quirky set of private ideas you may hold, but perhaps they're best not to be shared or part of your public identity. And I think maybe that's part of a reaction against, sort of right-wing religion that you get in places like the US and other places where there are, movements which are more to do with being right-wing than they are to do with religion, probably. And so I can see Australia's in a bit of a hearing what happens in the world and trying to position itself not to receive some of the things that we may not as a society embrace. But I think you're right. I think there is this sort of allergic response.
Yes, and as you say about those kind of, what are they? Are they religions? No, those little versions of Christianity which are quite bizarre sometimes, they would appear to be, and off-putting.
Yeah.
And then a lot of people the church became associated with, a stern, unforgiving kind of attitude with children at Sunday school. I mean, for me, Sunday school was a really kind of a nice experience. And I went to a very kind of western suburbs, a poor little parish in North Footscray, which was lovely. And my parents were not. I'm sort of wandering off here, but it's good to wander off. My father was a Catholic until he was a Roman Catholic till he was about 14, and then he became more interested in football, I think. And my mother was probably what you'd say was an agnostic, but she didn't use that word. They weren't interested. But to go off to this little weatherboard church on the corner of Ballarat Road with a rubbish tip down the back, very working class, I guess. And it was kind of like my first, an early brush with poetry. There was the liturgy, there was the hymns. For a boy who was not brought up in a religious world in that way, it's kind of interesting. And soon I was being an altar boy, and in the Easter, I'd get up at 3 a.m. to go down and kneel with the candle, the Paschal candle, is it? Yeah, etc. And it was like very interesting, and it was poetic, I guess. I can say that in retrospect. At the time, it was just something which was unusual. It wasn't part of normal life, and that was the benefit. It wasn't part of normal life. And there was a choir and a little harmonium and organ. There's sort of a kind of a richness in that out at Footscray. That was good.
I was interested during COVID when I think we had various allowances of how far we could be away from home during lockdown, and I spent a lot of time walking around in a city, really, that was in the proper radius of where I live in East Melbourne, and just walking through places like Fitzroy and Collingwood and Richmond. Amazing to see all of the historic buildings that formerly were church buildings, and there were so many of them, because I took from that in an earlier generations, probably 3 generations ago, it was part of people's civic identity. You were who you were, because you're at these parts of the community where you gathered in a way that we don't have now. And I kind of reflected, I think, somewhere else that modern day people might as well, we could hear people here, they find their community in Tuscany or something, for all I know. We have a worldview that's different. We don't find our community just in local place like we humans mostly have done for as long as humans have been around.
Yes, it was like that. Every month there was a little dance of a Friday night or whatever. And so, and of course this is pre-television, pre-phone.
Yes, yeah,
People looked each other in the face.
indeed.
They were with each other. There was a connection which was very organic and normal, or sort of natural, or something natural, very
Well, I was
very
really
human, very human.
thrilled this year. I got sent this little collection of, this is How to Get There, Lent 2004, and it was developed for the parishes of Bunyip and Castlemaine. So there you are. That can't get more eclectic than that. But it does give I don't know if you remember, your generosity says, Michael Leunig's abounding generosity and courtesy have made this little booklet possible. So there you go. You may not have been aware of that, but what I was taken in the words in the front, just references to a man, Alan Laity, who may be a name that's known to you, but it's talking about he was a parish priest at Footscray where you grew up, and just he goes on to talk about that tradition of how the church was there, and how Alan Laity had a deep affection for you and was very proud of your work.
Oh.
And it goes on to say that St. Francis of Assisi, too, would delight in Leunig's work. Francis said that we are bound to preach the gospel and only when necessary use words. He might well be describing Michael Leunig. So, you've got a bit of a fan club out there, Michael, in any days of... But right back from those times. So Alan Laity, tell us anything about him that you remember.
Well, he was the priest, and I don't remember the previous... I think Father Alan was there when I started going, and he was just a remarkable man, feet on the ground, very convivial. He seemed to enjoy people. He was just a beaut personality, and not an amazing sort of entertainer or anything like that. He was a fairly straightforward man and always had time for most people and everyone as far as I could see. So anyway, and so I went through the whole thing. I was baptised. I hadn't been baptised as an infant, and so I went through baptism there in order to become confirmed, and the 39 articles and all this thing, like with Father Alan teaching us in confirmation class. And I wasn't a fanatic or anything. It was easy going for me. It was nice, and some pretty good people, and the group, all ages, all that sort of thing, all ages. It was like a village, and it wasn't exclusive. There were all people coming and going, and it just felt right. And I was not a fanatic. I wasn't going around preaching God to people. It was my private business. God was private to me a bit. It was obviously shared in there. But there was a sense in which it's personal and private and mysterious, and that's a lot. That's a lot. That's a sort of poetic approach to life, and life is a poem, really. If you want, if you can approach it poetically. I say this because as a boy, I remember my mother in particular, would cut out little bits of poetry from magazines, just a few little lines, and pin them up at home. So the idea of people's poetry, and it would be like the bush poets too, they were words of wisdom basically, they'd put them up, words of wisdom. So this was a nice folk poetry that I had a lot as a child. And I was more interested in that than sport or those sort of subjects at school. It was... And I'm glad to hear you mention St. Francis. I was reading about St. Francis the other day, and he was referred to by some as God's little fool. God's little fool. That appealed to me because I love the idea of the holy fool, the innocent child, or who in maturity is still somewhere an innocent child. And I think this is such an important quality to hold on to, particularly in this world of the cult of cleverness, the intensely overpowering, the secular sort of scientific insistence all the time, that one can hold on, to have this direct continuity back to childhood, those early impressions of life, which was so true, and they were so full of terror for some, full of mystery for others. And I think it's possible to retain this innocence and not just be totally innocent, but have a line still open to this thing, which I call mature innocence. And I think in maturity, it doesn't rule out an openness and a goodwill and a curiosity and being available to mysteries and enchanted by mysteries, to be enchanted by life and each other. And I think this aggressively secular culture is so cold and unforgiving, and I think we appear to be living in a time when so many people are at each other's throats. In spite of the fact that a lot of people aren't, there's a tone of harshness and in debate and in our politics, and clearly in the wider world there's this almost a savagery, as if what is missing? Where's the sweetness in human nature? Well, it's there amongst us all. But you have to dare to have it and speak from that position too. And I think the poet does. The artist can, although I'd say the world of the arts has become as corrupt as anywhere else, and probably always was. There's not many. I don't know. There's this harshness I'm talking about, which is, as you get older, you feel it more.
What's been the cost to you about being a public figure? Because you speak, as you're speaking now, of an inner life and being sustained by things which are in the within, but then you become a well-known institution for many people in Melbourne and wider. You're a public figure. You take some positions that people in the political sphere want to slap you down for.
Absolutely.
What's the cost of being a public figure for a person like you?
Well, that's one of the costs. The amount of hostility over, say, 50 years, 55 years, a lot of hostility. A lot of it probably deserved. If you're a cartoonist working to a deadline, you make mistakes. Some bad judgments. You win some, you lose. Sometimes things are lovely and divine, and other times they're crass and a bit unbalanced, particularly in one's earlier days. And I didn't like the idea of trying to have a smart punchline and hurting someone, which a lot of humour has been about that, has been clever and, sort of sharp. So that's one of the costs, is a lot of hostility. And of course, in any area of self-expression or arts, there's a heck of a lot of envy, or and that's a hidden factor. It's under the surface. And it accounts for a lot of hostility, and people will try and bring you down. And I saw, like even the other day, I was removed from the age. I was sort of like culturally assassinated on on a bad day, I would think that, because I think there was my philosophy had diverged too far away from the corporate philosophy. And I saw in this online magazine, Crikey, Crikey was saying, should we mourn Leunig's kind of...
We had a debate, yes.
Then
we
they
should
had a
mourn the
debate
axing
and
of
someone has to
Michael
get
Leunig.
up and trash me again.
No, we shouldn't.
And it's
Yes,
part
no.
of the intellectual world. I mean, I think, the intellect is a fine thing and it's a deadly thing too, and people can hurt each other. And the world of art is full of it, people stabbing and hurting and...
But there's something about, being a public figure,
Yeah.
you lose, and for someone who wants to tell a story, you lose the telling of your own story, don't you, to the
Yeah, that's
hands of these two people who are debating, should we mourn your ending with the age or not?
Well,
it's kind of...
yes, one person said that, no, we shouldn't. Good riddance to him and all that. So you have to, I'm too old to hear this.
How's this work?
And I think, what is driving this hostility? I mean, I'm a guy who draws ridiculous-looking characters with a big nose and all that. What is so demonic about that? And it is interesting. It's maybe if you touch someone, thinking spiritually or emotionally, if a drawing or some music touches people and makes them cry, if you touch the human heart, the soul, you use the word soul, it's obnoxious to some people. And this is a mystery. So this is a part of being a public figure. But look, a public figure, I've never tried to be a public figure. Honestly, this was just my vocation when I'm a young man. I got my call-up notice to go to Vietnam. And of course, they discovered pretty quickly that I was totally deaf in one ear, so they didn't want me. But it set me on a course of, the peace cause, peace, and being in the demonstrations. I think I was probably in the very first anti-Vietnam demonstration ever held in Australia. It was over here, just past the hotel on the corner. What is that one?
Young and Jackson.
Young and Jackson's. That's where they drew the marbles out of just in a building up the road, drew them out. And just a few of my friends, there were about 20 of us, put on placards and walked up and down. And we're amazed the number of ASIO guys who turned up with cameras within minutes, and the people who spat at our feet, and all that sort of thing. So that started me on things. And there was a lot of little student-type publications which were anti-Vietnam, anti-war, basically.
Well, I don't know. I just thought I'd give you this. This was the chapter in the book we did, and this was a Ron Tanberg cartoon, and this was a book that was edited by Barney Zwartz. So I thought that the late Ron Tanberg and the still present Barney Zwartz, this could be the age's proper regard for you as a colleague.
Oh, that's a lovely thing.
Where it's got, this was a chapter in the book, Michael Leunig, the plaintive prophet, and someone saying, Leunig is hoping we consider the truth before it's too late. And the other one says, when's the deadline?
Yeah.
I didn't know if you've been the subject of cartoons very often yourself.
Oh, thank you. No, Ron was a dear friend. And we worked together side by side for years, and we had some marvellous...
So maybe that is the better statement of what the Age and its readers think about you than the kind of what I thought were weasel words that came on that last Sunday when it was announced that you had been adiered.
Adiered, yes. Yes, it's a funny experience to being let go. We've got to let you go. We're sorry, but we have to let you go. You know, oh well. And so I have to get on with life. It's good to have a turning point thrust upon you. I probably wouldn't have done it. I would have been too lazy and complacent and just sort of gone on in an unhappy situation. So it is a blessing. But look, the other side of a public figure, and I know you won't believe me, I didn't set out to do that. It was a vocation to make cartoons or statements that would go out amongst my people, meaning my fellow citizens, that about Vietnam, about this and that, which leads to another thing. And so all you're trying to do is make pieces of work, that matter, even just to some, at least. And that's a vocation. Right. It's a calling. It's not a career in the normal sense. And so then when your vocation is cut off, you think it's a lifetime vocation, and you hope that in your older years you might have found a kind of wisdom worth reporting on too, to include in your work. And that would be a valuable phase of work in your very old age, if one is still capable. And I think one could be very capable. And we do, I think, lack those voices in our culture. This is obviously where youth obsessed more than ever, and all good. It's lovely to see, fit, bright young people, but also the absence of the old is a sad thing to realise, and the lack of care for them and what they need, and so, yeah. But a public figure, I must thank all those people who've supported me, nameless people who've been very encouraging, who walk up to me on the street or whatever. That is so touching. That is so touching, and always has been, and it's very genuine. And you can never thank people enough for that, or adequately or properly. It just becomes your reality. And the great quality of St. Francis and Jesus was some sort of the idea, is it a Christian idea of humility? Of humility. The meek shall inherit the earth kind of idea, that this is no affectation, it's not virtue signalling, to say you actually believe in the wisdom of humility and the value of humility in this sort of madly egotistical, competitive world. I think that's a beautiful idea. And God help me, I hope that I have held on to, I kept my feet on the ground, and I think maybe my background helped in that. My friends, my school friends, my teachers, my parents, my neighbours, it was a humble culture, full of appalling people too. If you know what I mean, it's natural. These are not saints, but there was a humility, I think, and that becomes a good value, a great value. Which,
well, I think one of the things you've been able to do that is quite remarkable for those of us who try and do something in the same line, but probably take a different approach, is that through, in a way, always having lots of open questions, you create a pathway for people to find the space about a spirituality, a question about God, in a different way to some of us who are, more the official. We'll teach you this. We'll tell you what the content of the faith is. I think you use a more of an open questioning way, which people, just reading things that people will put online about how they actually come to find God through encountering your cartoons or your poems, which is a lovely thing. I always find it's a lovely thing if people say they've found God through hearing me preach. But, they say, I know there are people who say that about their encounter with God through your work. So I think that's quite a beautiful thing, but it's different to those of us who are the professional kind of church leaders.
But it's all part of the one process, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just different parts of the spectrum. And I mean, that has ever been the work of an artist. A very genuine artist is, I mean, Mozart, Beethoven, whoever, they all it was creative. This idea we have, this word creativity, it's a magical sort of idea that one plus one can equal five if you create. In a sense, more than the sum of its parts, that something arises which is enchanting or magical or very touching, and is a revelation to the artist also, and is an epiphany. I think you can have little epiphanies. They're not all great shining lights, and people, I think humans are capable of this, some more than others obviously, who want to do it, who can give time to it and give their life to it. But in our ordinary life, I think the possibility of epiphany, of an awakening, and a joy in that awakening too, and a sense of goodness, not virtue goodness, just a sort of something is good and healthy and sane. And sanity has often been one of my
Well, I think that's part of this,
concern.
is a society allergic, our society allergic to God? There is something about, does the society carry, the principles of this openness, the principles, the possibility of this inquiry? Is it nurturing that, or are people, in a way, through the societal values, being a bit, hardened off and, closed off to something? And what they're offered is inherently unsatisfying. I often think that in a secular society like ours, it really has to rely on an optimism about human nature, that human nature can improve things on its own. But then in a world like ours, all the evidence seems to be contrary to that humans are capable of much improvement on their own without the kind of reference points that go into a more transcendent space. So I think that a secular society like ours can get itself into a pretty cruel trap, that we just don't hear the voices. And the voices that will speak might be strident voices of the kind we're talking about.
You mean the open voices?
Yeah.
The open voices. And to keep ourselves open, yes, we all struggle with that, I guess. We become set in our ways and our views, and that's natural. But as I'm saying about sanity, has always been a concern of mine. It means sanity is health, a healthy culture, a healthy society. Is about sanity, and I don't want to be too prescriptive. I can't be too prescriptive about what that is, but we sense when things have gone mad, and I think we sense it a lot these days. And this madness, and to psychiatrists traditionally have, or psychologists, or people concerned of that inner life, of the soul, the psyche, have been very articulate and very good at describing the failure or insanity or loss of equilibrium. But who describes sanity? Did Freud describe what a sane situation is? It might sound harsh to talk about sanity, like this is proper, you have to be sane, but we do understand, we do intuitively understand when things are mad. And you can toss that word around very easily, but it has a meaning. When humanity's turning in on itself, when it's bombing each people, the death and the cruelty going on in the world. It's always gone on, I guess, but at the moment the technology of cruelty is astonishing. And so sometimes you have to step back and sit down and look at the sky and say, this is madness. What? Why? Why are they doing this? why are they destroying this earth and children and human decency and conscience and morality, all these ideas.
And Michael, probably many people will kind of have a mental image as you're speaking of some of your cartoons, which sort of have these moments of the contemplating the chaos, and it ends up in contemplating the little plant. Or
Yes,
you know,
yes.
I'm sure everyone here who knows your work can know that sequence. But because there is, I think that's what you often seem to lead people to, finding in the simple and the present and the before your own eyes something which is hopeful, meaningful, and about the sanity that perhaps the external world isn't offering you.
Yes, and that little flower is so simple, but it's very profound. It's a miracle. And I know people say, oh, that's a bit of a cute thing to say, but it is.
Yeah.
Ask anyone who studies flowers or butterflies and who takes the time. So when you're asking, I think it's not just that the flower is simple, it is natural.
Yes.
And I think this idea of what is natural is also an old, beautiful idea. We used to refer to someone as, oh, they're a very natural kind of person. That sort of sounds a bit sane to me and healthy and feet on the ground. And after all, we're talking about God here all the time, in a sense, or the presence of God in this kind of this mystery. I mean, the more you talk about it, the more it sounds like you're trying to pin it down, and I'm not. And I know some people would say, oh, you're just being blissfully unaware. You've got to come in closer on it and describe it properly. I said, no. But we're talking of, sanity and madness and conscience and kindness, and people will sneer, like the sneering humour, the sneering that's going on in the world amongst intellectuals who should know better, I think.
And so what, in your own creative process, I'm interested in, how the cartoon, the drawn form sits alongside of the words.
Interesting. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what's first or second, doesn't really matter, but what's the interrelationship in your own creative process as to how you come up with, in a way, a poetic cartoon?
What comes first? Yes. Well, I mean, you think about it. What is a word? What is an alphabetical letter? It is an image, isn't it? It was once a mark made. And so it is an image in a sense. It is a picture. And language is made up of all these little pictures. So I'm fascinated by the relationship too. If you write a little poem, and it can sometimes seem too direct and bland and obvious, you sit it next to a little picture, and suddenly it takes the tension out of the words, all the intellectual aspect of the thing. It becomes primal with a little drawing, primal in the good sense, back to very a basic inner impulse. So if I draw, and I will draw, because there's a bit of paper there and there's a pen, and
You're attracted to it. The magic will happen.
I am. It's lovely. It is lovely to sit and doodle on a bit of paper like a child does without any problem at all. The great art is made by children.
Well, show us how you do it then.
Oh.
You've never done this before,
There's not
I
much
know.
to see. You probably can't see a line as fine as this. What I'll do, I'll just draw this character I've somehow emerged at high school, I think, you know, drawing on the back of exercise books and being discovered by a teacher and saying, no, you don't do that, you should be writing your essay. and so it's really nice to draw, and everyone can do it. And I've never wanted to draw literally, you know, like a photograph. Some people will say, oh, that looks exactly like a horse. I say, yeah, well, I'm sorry about that.
Wrong person, yeah.
Oh, well, now, what will I do? I'll fall over. I've recently had a sad event in my life, which is I've lost this eye, and it looks like it's there, but it's not. So I'm a bit wobbly on my feet, my balance and my sense of judgment. And when I draw or paint now, you need two eyes to get spatial judgment right. And so I'm not sure when the pen's going to hit the paper. Oh yeah, it's on the paper now. So it just means that life has to become more slow, more careful, more patient. And I've got those three words stuck on my studio wall, and I now call my studio my laboratory, and because that's a good sort of way to...
It is. So you're right to get up to...
Yeah, I will. If I fall over, just look away and I'll get on my feet. No, it is a little tricky.
They're very low chairs, I know.
Oh, yes, but hang on. How did I get past this? Yeah, I do it. Now, we were talking of St. Francis. Well, I had this little character which emerged in my work, and I developed an affection for it. And if I wanted to draw something sort of that pleased me, I draw the little character who's really like a friend, and it's really an infant. But let's imagine this one is St. Francis, who was called, God's little fool. And so I'd often start, I'd always start with this ridiculous large nose like that. And then the eye was very important. It was far too big. So I'm starting there, and then so the pupil in the eye is important. And then, a sort of a cheerful one. So there's the head, but if I wanted to be St. Francis, I would do something like that. Oops. And this person, people would say, well, what gender is this person? I say, I don't know. And they would say, well, indicate. And I'd say, well, I'll put some little long hair on if it's meant to be a female for the sake of the joke. So this person, and the wobbly line is very important to me. I don't do it deliberately. It just happens. They say, nature does not like straight lines. I'm inclined to agree. And I do value the wobbly line. It adds interest. Life is a bit wobbly. Oops. Oops is a word I use a lot. Often with bare feet, the child. And then, there's often a moon. I kind of enjoy the moon. The moon is very easy to draw. It's, mysterious up there. And maybe maybe St. Francis might have a flower for his girlfriend, Claire. And he makes his way. So is that visible? So it's very easy. It's a kind of a like a. It's like a sort of. It's a way of writing for me. It's an aspect of writing, and that's not meant to be amazing or astonishing. And I don't think St. Francis was trying to be amazing or astonishing. Maybe. Now, I'm going to sit down.
And I think Elizabeth's going to probably come back now and encourage some interaction from our people who are present today.
So there will be an opportunity at the end for those at the back to come down and have a closer look. But I think if we just say thank you both for this conversation before we open up for questions. Thank you both.
Thank you.
So it's now time to receive questions from the audience. We have a couple of roving microphones. Do keep your questions brief and to the point so that we can hear the answers that will come, and we'll see how long this goes for. But is there anyone that has a question for either of our guests? We might start down at the front. Penny, there's a roving microphone.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Archbishop Phillip, would it be possible to make Michael a saint?
Well, the question was, Archbishop, would it be possible to make Michael a saint?
No, I think, no, too much is known about me, I think. But thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much, Michael and Archbishop. At the last Lambeth conference, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Archbishop Welby, said that he's often confronted with criticism that the church shouldn't get into politics. And he commented on that: the church is not getting into politics, the church is getting into God. Now, it seems like an eternity since Kevin Rudd said that climate change was a moral issue. And it's interesting that it was only when he backed away from that quite a bit, pressing on it, that was the start of his decline and ultimate fall from being Prime Minister. And since then, of course, there are many other what seem to be moral issues in our society, vital to the health of our society and the world and us as individuals. We might add to climate change refugees, Aboriginal issues in Australia, and of course now the situation in the Middle East. And my question is, how can the church get a greater voice in these issues, which are so vital to all of us, our health? Get a voice in that, in all of those debates, because it doesn't seem to really have one at the moment.
So how does the church get a voice in these spaces, but particularly when people say that the church shouldn't get into politics?
I might just have a brief response. I think that often the first comment about we shouldn't get into politics is usually said by people who would like you more to support their side of politics. So they never say that. They never say that if you are saying things praising them up, but they usually say it when you're saying anything which might challenge them. So I think some of that's just the kind of the language that you use in a public square to shut down your kind of people who might be irritating. And I think there's I think this is one of the difficulties, really, you got this of the age we're in, that we do elevate the political sphere almost to be beyond criticism, and you see that with people accept totalitarian dictatorships around the world. A strong politician, people get more praise for being strong than learning if they're wrong. We don't sort of praise that. We don't think, well, someone might have had some experience, they've taken a different approach, and they're to be complimented that they've got a nimble mind to react to different circumstances. So we're in a different kind of age, and there are many things that you can have opinions about. I suppose, as far as I can see, this church in this diocese, we have engaged in political matters. Sometimes our cathedral, I get lots of messages of people who think that we're being too political if we have some sort of a banner supporting refugees or other kinds of causes we've supported on the cathedral. So I do know what you're talking about, but I think that there is a proper voice for many actors in a society to make it a strong society and have views that come from all different insights. And I think that's rich.
I would think the church is a many splendid thing, of course, but it would require great sort of wisdom and not to be too confrontational, because it's better than that, in a sense. I mean, say, should the church be involved in politics? I'd ask myself, should I be involved in politics? It's so disgraceful, it's revolting. So what can you do? Well, that's my take on it at this point. And I think one has to go around it and above it, in a sense, or beneath it, and make the same, important statements. Don't join in the political language and things like this. It has a better language. It must have faith in. And easy to say this, and I understand how life leads to politics without you even thinking about it. And you have to deal with things, as you say, which I don't, which are complex. But I mean, if one's to go into politics, go into it not as a politician, but as something better or deeper, or something more profound that touches, which is obviously the church's
And that's
duty.
been a bit of the purpose of these breakfast conversations, to look at really the broad question of what kind of a society do we want to be. And we've had, in the 60-odd opportunities here, of a lot of people who have brought expertise and insight in conversation to these kind of broad questions of what kind of a society. So I think, that to me is a really important part of a democracy, that the people can gather, they can get quality information which exceeds the soundbite, and consider for themselves what kind of positions, what kind of policies, what kind of things in the public place we'd like to hold. So that's been my small aspiration of contributing through these, and so I congratulate those of you who've been journeyers on the way with me to have your thoughts widened from the range of things we've opened up.
And should one whip the money changers out of the temple? Etc. I mean, I think Jesus knew about politics a little bit, in his own way. So.
Thank you. I'm going to be like your duck, Leunig, and wander a bit off the garden path, reflecting on Archbishop's question to you about how you match words with the pictures that you're drawing. And you were saying that, with the words that you write, it's a limited way of presenting something, because you've got the 26 letters in English of the alphabet to choose from and all that. And it made me think of the Chinese language, which has no alphabet.
You just get to hold the microphone a bit closer so Michael can hear, yeah.
Sorry. Talking about language and how the Chinese language has no It's the only language without an alphabet. It's a combination of symbols and almost like hieroglyphics, and it's a very complex thing. And the attempt by the government to put an alphabet to it, which is what they call pinyinisation, which has happened since the 50s, and it's slowly gaining ground. And I've not been educated in Chinese, so I never actually learned to write Chinese, but I've learned the pinyin system of Romanizing the Chinese language, and that has helped me a lot. And I've actually made some effort to try and learn some Chinese writing. So I don't know if that actually reflects something about worldviews and how you see the world, because I think our perspective on the world is very much defined by the way we think about the world, and the way we think about the world is how we often express it in writing. If you are going to say to someone.
So,
yeah, so.
your question?
The question is, I wanted to know what your response to it, in the way that I've responded to your point about, the writing versus the word. Letters, yeah. I just want your response to it.
When the Archbishop asked you the relationship between the words and the images,
Yes.
I think this lady would like to understand, how does your perspective on language and how it can be used become part of your work and your worldview?
How does language... Well, for instance, I don't know whether this will explain anything what I'm going to say now. I'll say, all right, if I draw a moon, it's a more efficient way of saying moon than writing the word, but everyone knows what it means, and maybe in an image there might be a feeling. If I draw a teapot, as I often do, this is a symbol, and we're living in a time when the police are looking at hate symbols on, in the protests and things, the so-called hate symbols of hate, I don't know. But if you draw a teapot, who here has not seen a teapot in a rather, benign situation? It tends to be associated with warmth, shared, domestic, non-threatening. It gives, it pleases. So you only have to draw a teapot, and anybody here can draw a teapot if they try. And in fact, I'll add one there. So immediately, you're not saying teapot, you're giving the feeling of teapot, of the warmth. That's a hope, that there's a warmth, there's a domestic shared quality, which we grew up with, and we still use. We still have teapots in many cultures, and there's some sense of goodness and nourishment and warmth, and unpretentious. There's something very functional. So you do that in a drawing. I once did, I remember when I started drawing the duck, which is a similar symbol. Does anyone here have a problem with a duck? Just raise your hand. I'm curious to know. But it's a symbol. It's something that is kind of pleasing enough, and it's fun to watch, and it's not very threatening. It's got this rounded beak. It's not a pointy beak that hurts you. So you draw a duck, and it becomes something not part of normal life in some respects. I mean, when this started for me was a long time ago. I was working on a paper called Newsday, which was the Age's afternoon newspaper. It failed ultimately, but I had this terrible thing that happened. A terrible thing had happened in Vietnam, and a group of Australian soldiers had been caught up in a minefield disaster, and one stood on a mine, and another man rushed to help him, and he stood on another mine, and so it happened, and it was appalling. It was just a shocking, sad disaster, and I was so stricken with that, I think, because I had friends there, school friends, and I wasn't particularly thinking of them, but I was very connected to the Vietnam War, and the deadline was looming, and I couldn't think of anything. I felt I had to respond to that event, but what can a cartoonist say? There's a time when you just want to shut up and not say anything, but I had to do something. So I remember I did a cartoon which was not a good cartoon at all. It was someone who was so overwhelmed by the world's tragedies that all this person wanted to do was to sit on a duck's back and ride away from it all, off into the sunset. Totally inappropriate sort of a cartoon, and mysterious. Who would understand it? It depended on the drawing, but I presented it to the editor on deadline, and he looked at it, and he looked at it, and he shook his head, and he said, "Michael, I don't understand this." And I said, no, right. And then he looked at it again, and then he looked at me with a smile, and he said, "But I like it. I like it." And that has been that was a great lesson. You don't have to understand a thing to like it, particularly in art or music or painting or poetry, but it's touched you somewhere. And that was a great lesson I learned. Where did I start with this? Could we remember? It's just about symbols. Symbols and the importance of them in our life, or little things that seem irrelevant but are still touching, and to keep them there in our daily life. The things that matter, the teapot, the duck. And I eventually got to describe that as the direction-finding duck. And a little character named Vasco Pajama who followed the duck, because the duck, when he was blocked, he couldn't go on. He followed the duck. And I suppose the meaning is, obviously, it wasn't intentional in my head, but that you must follow the primal, the small, the humble. Look to that when you're blocked. It will show you something. It's not intending to, but if you follow it, it'll lead on. Well, it's just a theory. It's just a poetic sort of idea. And we do it anyway. When we're down and out, we might find relief in some little thing which might be perfectly natural. I should, yes, is there, yeah, I think I'll do that in a minute, will I, or now? I'll do a duck. I'll do a duck. Oh. And once again, it's really important to have symbols which are easy to draw. There's this sense that if a drawing's good, it has to be very difficult. All it needs is a rounded beak, and it becomes a duck, and sort of webbed feet. So he was St. Francis about 10 minutes ago. I don't know who he is now, but and let's say on the ground here, maybe I'll step away so you can see it when I. Whoops. The important thing about a teapot is the spout, I think. I found it fascinating as a child. The spout I used to sit in my grandmother's house and stare at it. While my uncle showed me the tattoo he got in the war. And life went on in a normal way back in 1950 it would have been, I guess.
Two comments and a question. I hope I can remember them all anyway. Firstly, I loved the story that was recalled of Michael being offered some prize, and you called up the organisation and asked, "What is the dress for such for this occasion?" And they said it's black tie or something, and your response was to people around you was, "Well, I don't have black tie, so I'm not going to attend."
Did
Your question?
And secondly, your capacity to convey your ideas verbally are equally as impressive as what you do with your written work. Thank you. Finally, my question is, and I don't know if it's been explored to much extent, but should we be looking at the relationship between insanity or ego and the digital world, the increasing digitization of the world?
The question is, like, should we be considering, you were talking about sanity and insanity, should we be thinking about that and ego in the context of how the digital culture and increased digitization is going on now?
all the artificial intelligence, etc. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty alarming for me, but I mean, have we become a culture of screen watchers? And what does that do to you when you sit there on a couch and you just see film after film after film, non-reality? And I do wonder. I don't have theory where it leads you, but I think you've got to be careful with it. And see, I was pre-screen. I grew up pre-screen and saw a much more interactive world of humans mattering, etc., as I used to say back then. I don't know. Am I talking about the good old days too much? I don't know. And am I repeating myself, people, when I say this? People say, oh, not the teapot again, you know, not the duck. I was sick of the duck and the moon and all that, the bird. Because there's a tendency to be, we want stimulus, we want new. But I'm a great believer in repeating things. I spoke to a translator of, where she lives in Belgium, Mary Phil Corsac, who translated texts, biblical texts. And she explained to me that if you go literal in Genesis, there's a lot of repetition of words, repetition, and there was no shame. This wasn't bad writing. It was sort of, it had a meaning to repeat and repeat and not try and get rid of it too much. And so there's something unabashed about just, yeah, I'll put the duck in. You know, it's like cooking, not too much duck, you know, just a bit of duck, a bit of teapot. But I do like that things persist and repeat, not being rammed down our throats, but just there it is again, whatever. I like it. The bell on the church over the road. We don't want it to be too fancy. We just want that sound of the bell.
And there's some interesting work I've been reading lately by a man called Jonathan Haidt, who has written a book called, amongst others, called The Anxious Generation. It's really accounting for the rise of anxiety and mental health issues amongst essentially teenagers and young adults in the modern world. And he puts it down to both the intrusion of smart devices and the taking over of people's sense of esteem by the number of likes they get in those things, as well as the decline of unsupervised play for children. And that he says, you know, in a world where probably children are safer, in societies like ours than ever, people are more anxious, schools are more anxious, they're worried about litigation, they won't let children do things that are risky, but he says, you know, like in a way, the kind of the happy delight of a childhood where you're learning to interact with your peers, play in unsupervised ways, take kind of some risks that sometimes might mean, at the worst you do fall over and cut yourself or something. But this is part, he says, of developing a healthy human being. And that in both of these directions, the society as a whole is sort of conspiring to actually construct people who have, they're almost wired for anxiety, he says. And so I think there's, something in this lovely kind of playfulness that is really a healing thing in a world where that's not valued.
Yeah, well, to play and to make mistakes and not be worried that you're going to be condemned or you'll be humiliated if you get it wrong. I mean, it's such a... I suppose this is a lesson of school, isn't it? Often you got to get it right. And you think, oh, okay, but what if I get it wrong? And towards the end of your life, you realise you got, everything was wrong. And what does it matter? It's what happened. But to take the risk, as a child, drawing a duck would draw it. A very young child might draw a beautiful duck. I mean, it wouldn't look like a photograph of a duck, but all the better. And to dare to do that, I love, there was the author Henry Miller, the American author Henry Miller, put together a lovely book called Paint As You Like and Die Happy. And it's the idea that he used to get up at night and put his dressing gown on and sit and do little watercolours. He was a writer who would paint little watercolours, and he wouldn't try and make the horse look like a horse. He'd make it look like a very peculiar horse and enjoy it and chuckle. And I know that feeling. I often found if I'd done what I think was a cartoon that worked and I enjoyed, I would get to the end of it and I would chuckle and I'd say, good, it works. And you've got to enjoy it. So, and to play, children play, they enjoy to play. How can we bring play into our life? Well, we do it in our home, do we not? Probably not enough. And there's too much at stake often. Depends what you're playing with. But spontaneity, we're talking of spontaneity.
Thank you all so much. We'll bring this time to a close so that people have a chance to come down and look at the images. I do want to thank everyone that made today's event possible. That includes our sponsors, Anglicare Victoria and the Melbourne Anglican Foundation. And thank you all for coming and supporting today's event, and for those of you who have been supporting these events since 2007. We're very grateful that they have been so well received, and it's been a privilege to be part of that public discussion. I'll now please thank our guests, and I'll hand to the Archbishop to close our time together.
Can I tell you one small story before we go? It's not terribly significant, but I'm reminded of it now because I see a friend, Father David, in the audience, and I'm reminded when Rowan Williams, who's the previous Archbishop of Canterbury, came to Australia, and we did a little thing, a public talk. And he was lovely. He was a poet. He still is a poet. But he came to my farm with David to visit, and it was on the eve of the Iraq war. It was impending. Everyone's heart was in their mouth and I said to Rowan, do you want to plant an olive tree as a symbol of peace? And he said, oh yes, of course. And so we went down the back and we had this little olive tree and we planted it there with a prayer, I think, for peace. And now that tree is very large and thriving, and it seems important as we look at the world, hovering around these terrible war things that are happening and the cruelty and hurt. And I hope that olive tree comes to mind. Every time I see it, I remember that. And Rowan stood there and he looked out over the forest. He said, "Oh my God, it's a beautiful country. This is a beautiful country." And that is the story. No punchline. Thank you.
Well, thank you for being here, and thank Elizabeth and those others who've kindly been in her role to introduce things and moderate it. I've tried to get through the different experiences from a variety of people, so grateful for them and those who've been part of my team to help things happen. But most of all for people who do take the time. We've had a little bit later this morning. Maybe we should have done that for a while. We've gone online and done a few things, but it's lovely to have you. I'm going to close with one of Michael's prayers, which seems to pop up a bit, because I think it probably does speak to something which is we all experience, and this is the one about our contradictions. God bless our contradictions, those parts of us which seem out of character. Let us be boldly and gladly out of character. Let us be creatures of paradox and variety, creatures of contrast, of light and shade, creatures of faith. God be our constant. Let us step out of character into the unknown, to struggle and love and do what we will. Amen. Let's thank Michael again.